the competition better? And if so, how much better? Why are they better? And what have you learned that you can put into action to improve your operations? The first step is to tabulate the data and determine if your partners are better than you. Compare your own internal measurement data against your partners, making sure that there is consistency between your internal data and the data you collected. The delta between your performance and the benchmark is the gap. There will be three kinds of gaps: negative, when the external practices are superior; parity, when there is no significant difference between you and your partners; and superior or positive, when your internal practices are the superior one. In assessing the data, be cautious to not get bogged down in over-analysis, but instead keep it simple. The focus is not on the number or the elegance of the data. The focus is on who has the best practice and why. The chances are you will gather more data than you will need. So to avoid analysis paralysis, sort the data based on your purpose statement and focus only on the information related to your study. Use simple computations. Your guide should be to be roughly right. Don't get bogged down in the detail. Just determine who the data says is best. Put the data into formats that tell the story most clearly. Use the 7 statistical tools of quality: histograms, Pareto charts, pie charts, etc. And don't forget to look for key messages in the recorded information. Hopefully, during your data gathering, you have paid attention to what kind of drivers may be at work within your partner's organization. What I mean is that if you have done a good study, then you have a good feel for why the superior benchmark is the best. In other words, what is driving the superior performance? Some things you should consider are the organization's business practices, other work processes, their work standards, and the work environment. You should understand something of the economics and the industry of the partner's country. Also, culture can easily be a factor. It may be national culture, that is a key factor, but look also at the culture within the organization itself. Your assessment of the whys will also have to include a projection of the gap based on expected future performance and trends. Here's a chart, usually called a Z chart, which portrays a benchmark measure as compared to a benchmark leader. It shows the trends without taking any corrective action, and it shows the future gap when action is taken. Because all organizations are pursuing productivity improvements, it is not likely that the superior benchmark organizations will be sitting on their laurels. You can expect that they will be striving for improvements as well. It is important to keep this in mind during the data collection step. For this reason, once the gap is identified, it has to be projected so that it is fully understood. Projections both for your organization and the benchmark company should be limited to a 3 to 5 year horizon and be based upon historical productivity trends, the gap size, and what people think their future productivity may be. It is on the basis of these forecasts that tactical or strategic plans are identified for closing the gap. In our research funding study, we had to do a lot of follow-up with our partners in processing the data. In fact, we provided each organization a copy of our findings and conclusions and asked for their input. They all responded. We concluded that there were significant differences in structure, roles, and culture between all of us, and that we could continue to learn from one another. But we also concluded that our partners did much more contract funding with their product divisions than we do, which was key to their research organizations getting technology into the marketplace faster. Phase 4, internalizing results and taking action. The final phase of benchmarking focuses on 2 objectives. 1, how to integrate the study results into your organization's business operations, and 2, how to take action to close the gaps. This begins with communicating the benchmark findings. In considering a communications plan, the focus should be on overcoming any reluctance to accepting the findings. This is done by considering three factors: the audience, methods of communicating, and organization of the analysis. The report for management should have specific findings and recommendations. In planning your communication strategy, it is important to understand the audience and how the study may affect them. For example, management will need to know the basis for the new benchmarks in order to buy into their rationale, and the support of those employees whose work processes may change will need to be solicited. If suppliers or end user customers are affected, they too will need to understand the change in processes. You can, of course, expect some skepticism from those who have not had continuous contact with the external environment. Overcoming resistance to the value of the study and the results will require a comprehensive communications approach. First, keep people advised during the study with progress reports and trip reports. You don't want to surprise people. Second, although an executive review or presentation will probably be required, it is advisable to meet with the senior managers and employees most affected by the study in one-on-one reviews. In other words, let them see the data before it is presented and give them an opportunity to influence the recommendations. It will go a long way to assure their support. In preparation for formal communications, the benchmarking team should work with management and the process owners to do 5 things: rank the recommendations, agree on an implementation strategy, formalize an action plan, develop measurement and tracking schedules, and assign responsibility for managing and, when necessary, recalibrating or modifying the improvements. Action planning is where an organization's creativity for solving problems is applied to the activities and tasks that have to be accomplished. Also, the new practices or process changes will have to be clearly defined and the responsibilities, roles, and rewards stated. Some kind of project management tool will help, and one of the 4 methods for implementation will have to be chosen. The organization's current goals will have to be re-examined on the basis of the benchmarking data and the short and long-range plans adjusted to accommodate new annual goals and annual performance measures. And reward systems that support the new goals will need revision. Monitoring the action plan is essential to get the results you want. Dave Kearns used to say that we could expect what you inspect. Inspection of the action plans is an important part of benchmarking. It is best accomplished by integrating benchmarking right into an organization's key business processes, like planning, management process, and etc. As a result of the research and technology funding study that I mentioned earlier, we have totally revamped the way we fund these efforts. We have put in place a new funding model based on investment portfolios consisting of core technology, which is contracted with our operating divisions. But also a strategic portfolio is maintained for development of projects based upon the long-range directions of the corporation. Without the study, we would not have been able to demonstrate the need for us to do research funding in a new way. And we are keeping the study team together to revisit our partners again next year. A recalibration process must be installed to ensure that benchmarks are reevaluated and updated to ensure that they are based on the latest methods and practices. One approach would be to recalibrate the critical benchmarks annually. But recalibration should also include surveys and interviews of the study participants, managers, and employees who have implemented actions based on benchmarks to assess their attitude and their behavioral issues. Part of this assessment includes the effect of the most common pitfalls in the process. These are some of the most common pitfalls. Unclear purpose statement, leading to trivial studies or trying to do too much. Failing to get management's buy-in to the study so that they are surprised by the results. Excluding organizations from the study because you assume you can't get their data rather than trying. Poor questionnaires that ask so what kinds of questions and failing to probe at the work processes or practices, not engaging the functional managers, making site visits with only one person, trying to be overly precise or getting bogged down in detail or failing to get to the root causes, wandering from the purpose of the study and not identifying the reasons for a gap, not identifying the real drivers of a competitor's practices. The ultimate success of any benchmarking effort will depend on how well the partners and the participants understand these four phases and exercise the knowledge and discipline necessary to assure that all of the elements are covered with mutual understanding. When that happens, all the partners will benefit with a firm foundation of a well-designed benchmarking process in place. The organization will also recognize that 5 factors are essential to ensure its success. The first factor is senior management support. Top management should visibly and vigorously support benchmarking throughout the organization and establish clear duties for all managers. Additionally, management should empower employees who oversee the organization's processes, getting them to act as owners and to adapt best practices as a reality of business. The second factor is training. This training should familiarize employees with basic tools by which to analyze, understand, and improve work processes. But it should also provide employees with the requisite technical skills and tools to do benchmarking and to make improvements. The third factor is effective information systems, which is a key enabler of successful benchmarking. The right systems permit teams quickly and inexpensively to generate, disseminate, analyze, and store information. Among the crucial elements are spreadsheets and database management systems, process mapping and flowcharting tools, and networks featuring email and groupware programs. The fourth factor is the establishment of a learning culture. There are 2 keys here. First, to liberate employee potential rather than control it. Second, to encourage systematic thinking and learning rather than narrow problem solving. We should make employees aware that we expect not robotic conformity, but creativity and continuous learning that leads to business improvements. The fifth factor is to provide adequate resources. For benchmarking teams, resources take 3 forms: time, funding, and equipment. In terms of time, corporations should view the benchmarking team's effort as just as vital as the team members' full-time jobs. As for funding, management must provide adequate resources for research, training, site visits, data acquisition, report production, and interviews. In terms of equipment, often in the form of technology support, that is critical to the team's success. With these factors in place, any company is prepared to start benchmarking for best practices. As experienced benchmarkers report, this approach can improve quality and performance, reduce costs, expose employees to new ideas, and create buy-in for change. But first and foremost, the essence of benchmarking lies in a willingness to learn. Some experts say that vicarious learning, that is, learning from others, is the cornerstone of benchmarking. But I think benchmarking is the cornerstone of vicarious learning. Christopher Bogan and Michael English, in their recent book, Benchmarking for Best Practices, built on this idea of outreach in a 7-level hierarchy of benchmarking. The ranking goes this way, from bottom to top: learning from past successes, borrowing good ideas without regard to their corporate origin, developing internal best practices, matching industry average or standard practices, establishing leadership through industry best practices, targeting national best practices without regard for industry, and matching or exceeding the world's best practices. Some organizations will reach the top levels of this benchmarking hierarchy only after many years of effort, if ever. But anyone can start making improvements right now by having employees share their success stories, because successful quality initiatives begin by building on the organization's existing strengths. At our own organizations, we can identify our strengths informally through discussions in work groups or formally through detailed surveys and structured analysis. Benchmarking requires deep self-assessment and the ability to translate practices that work in another context into a process appropriate to your own organization. It is the essence of creativity. Despite this fact, some organizations fear of losing competitive advantage by sharing information. Few organizations would or should share competitive or proprietary information with competitors or unauthorized others, but the realm of proprietary advantage is quite small. Those islands of competitive advantage are surrounded by oceans of opportunity in business and management processes. Competitive advantage is in speed and quality of execution and deployment, not proprietary information. Besides, in the knowledge economy, most proprietary data is already in the public domain. New benchmarkers are always astonished and humbled by the willingness of practitioners to share. It is remarkable how willing people, especially those involved in the quality movement, are to share their success stories. They are proud of what they do. Let me caution you that benchmarking too often consists of industrial tourism. On any given day, hundreds of groups of managers are walking through someone else's plant or office, asking questions as they occur to them, expressing delight and appreciation at what they see. Interesting? Yes. Entertaining? Almost always. Productive? Only if you are lucky. Industrial tourism is a far cry from the deep analytical work that needs to be done to really adapt and adopt the best practices to your situation. It takes time to do it well. Without proper preparation, your benchmarking project will result in frustrated people and lackluster results. The key question is, how can senior executives and board members put benchmarking to work in their organizations? They can mandate the use of competitive benchmarks in operating reviews, strategic planning, and goal setting. They can actively promote a culture that encourages learning from others, competitors, suppliers, and customers. They can make information sharing and creative adaptation central parts of their company's reward and evaluation systems. It is senior management's support, or lack of it, that will determine the speed with which employees embrace best practice approaches. Benchmarking is a tool that can expose the need for change, quantify the magnitude of the improvements that are needed, and it can model examples of how these improvements can be done. I realize that many cultures traditionally have not encouraged the sharing of information with others, but it is no longer a matter of choice. Global competitiveness mandates that we learn by looking outside of our own environments. I can assure you that benchmarking can enable our organizations to make the quantum leaps that we all need to survive in the new global economy.
Let's begin the first question and answer session. We will try to answer as many questions as possible. Therefore, we ask that only one question be asked per phone call and that these questions be as brief as possible. You may call the studio at 619-265-1021 or you may fax your questions to 619-594-8178. The first question comes from Villahermosa, Tabasco, and it's coming from Pemex, Mexican Petroleum. Reception, I can't hear anything. I'm sorry, I can't hear that. The question is as follows. You are mentioning that benchmarking is applicable in big enterprises. What do you recommend in order to apply this into micro enterprises that are flourishing in developing countries?
Oh, that's a very good question. My suggestion would be one that, in a startup basis, that you do approach some larger organizations and learn about benchmarking from them, that you consider looking at the professional associations that are available who may act as a sort of facilitator for the small groups to come together for the exchange of information. I think in the presentation I mentioned the use of strategic benchmarking as a tool where there is an ongoing relationship with a group of organizations. I would suggest for small organizations that they consider that sort of approach. But at the same time, I would, and the reason for that is that you can share resources and it involves a minimal amount of investment. But I would not shy away from approaching large organizations, particularly in functional areas like payroll processes, billing, manufacturing, etc. I hope that addresses your question.
The next question comes from Tehuacan, Puebla, and it's coming from the Technological Institute in Tehuacan, Mexico. Good morning. What are the criteria that we must consider in order not to confuse intellectual property with benchmarking, for instance, which is what is happening with the software world these days?
That is also a very good question. That is a very difficult issue to deal with from two perspectives. Number one, as you say, software is a knowledge-based technology, and knowledge flows very freely. It is important, however, to protect one's own intellectual property and that of other organizations. And as I think I may have mentioned during the presentation, it's very important that you have an understanding with potential partners of your ethical responsibilities. It is equally important that you understand your legal responsibilities, particularly with regard to patents and potential patents, and therefore it is wise to talk with your legal counsel, your organization's legal counsel, before you begin benchmarking. It also is important that organizations who are going to exchange consider the use of non-disclosure arrangements and documents. It is, as you suggest, it is a very difficult road to walk, but it is in today's world where technology moves so rapidly. I think we need to be cautious, but not so cautious in trying to protect information that we fail to have these exchanges at all.
A very cordial greeting to people in Medellin, Colombia. This one comes from the university, IAFIT. No, I just can't hear properly. Okay. The question is, what is the level of participation in conceiving the research? Must we offer the associates, the partners, in order to get their commitment to the process?
If I understood the question correctly, that is, what do you need to do to engage employees or participants to get their cooperation? Benchmarking is as a tool in an organization where its purpose is to gather information and to use that information to improve the process of the organization itself. That being the case, it is very helpful to the process when the people who will have to implement those changes, who will have to improve that process, are the people who are really engaged in the benchmarking methodology, that is the process itself. To the degree that they can even meet their counterparts in other organizations and can exchange information with one another, you will find, one, the acceptance of change much higher, the implementation of the changes much faster, and the return on that investment, I think, will occur more quickly and be more pronounced. So again, I encourage you in doing the process to engage as many people in the organization as possible.
And now we want to welcome University of Guadalajara in Jalisco, Mexico. Good morning. I'm calling you from the Distance Education Unit, and this is our question. You were mentioning a process of collaboration between different departments. Right now, the interdependence is seen as something very necessary in the globalization and internalization process. However, in the collaboration culture has not yet been really established. If you were asked to present a plan, a three-step plan, what would you suggest for us to really have interdependence?
Okay. Good question. I don't know if this will be a three-step answer or not, but I'll get started. First of all, let me have a short preamble. In my experience in teaching benchmarking courses and quality courses in Latin America, I observed that the people in my class or classes are somewhat instinctively collaborative. I'm not sure what the reason for that is, but people tend to be very cooperative. They work well in groups. Very frankly, they take to it more quickly than I observe in some of the American courses that I teach. Now, that said, I don't think it's a foreign behavior. In terms of business practice, I understand the reluctance and the difficulty. I would suggest this. I would suggest, first of all, that organizations who wish to start benchmarking and wish to demonstrate the power of cooperation and collaboration, one, bring in speakers to conferences from organizations who have successfully applied benchmarking or who are subject matter experts. That would be one thing. The second thing is I would start benchmarking internally, which is a pretty non-threatening methodology, and allow organizations to look at the application of internal functions first, and to do that as teams, and then have the cross-exchange between teams. Thirdly, I would gather as much literature as I could, both in some of the books that I have mentioned. I believe there's a bibliography in the materials, but also from the public domain of success stories of organizations who have implemented benchmarking, and there are an increasing number of those in Latin America, and share those with as many people in the organization as possible so that they can begin to see the value in that kind of interdependence. There's a big communications effort. I understand that.
Next question comes from Asunción, Paraguay, and it's coming from the Catholic University from Asunción, Paraguay. Good morning. We are here in the auditorium of our university, and the question is as follows. In a country where the enterprises are known for a very little vision, long-term vision, and for having autocratic leadership, and also a one-way communication, only vertical down from the boss down to the employee, and the decision-making processes are not very open, and there are conflicts. And how can you implement benchmarking in this kind of environment?
Not very well. Let me offer some advice on a couple of observations. First of all, if the senior management of an organization is not prepared to use collaboration, to use benchmarking, external database as a tool for the management of the organization, then in truth it just is not going to happen. Now, how can you influence such people? Again, what I think I said earlier, I would do what you could to share anything from the literature with your management so that they can begin to understand what is really happening worldwide, and the significance of benchmarking as an example, and total quality management, and how it can help an organization improve. Secondly, I would even include some literature on what the world is like, what's happening. Two books that come to mind, I don't know if they're available in Spanish, but certainly in English. One is by Lester Thurow, and it's a book called Head to Head. And among other things, one of the things that Lester Thurow describes the new global economy as a competitive, cooperative one. And I think it is an interesting insight for business managers to understand how interdependent the global economy is. The second book is just out this year by John Naisbitt, is called The Global Paradox, and it's probably one of the better current descriptions, simple descriptions of what is happening in the world's economy. And we are living in a world where both technology and resource is becoming available to anyone and everyone. Competition is emerging from places that we wouldn't have imagined just a few years ago. So very autocratic organizations who are going to have a single focused decision process are going to find that they tend not to be able to move quickly enough for the kind of world that we live in. So in the interest of your organization, I would encourage you to educate your management in the best way you can. And good luck.
Next question comes from the Technological Institute from Mexico.
Muy buenos días.
Good morning.
¿Cómo se debe aplicar
How would you have to apply benchmarking within an educational institution toward a total quality approach?
The use of benchmarking in educational environments is new, but it is happening. There are some examples. In education generally, particularly what is usually called K through 12, primary education, there's a great deal of information exchange that takes place already. School districts and schools are always comparing themselves to other schools and other school districts. How reliable that data is a question, and how well they understand what really is behind some of those numbers that are used is a question. So I'm beginning to see, certainly in this country, here in